it's a really tough spot right now. I mean, when I look out there and I see, what happened with obviously the franchise tag guys, this year, but even Dalvin Cook earlier than that, where Minnesota came and basically said, hey, either take a pay cut or, get lost, basically.
Right.
That's the way the position is around. And from a team standpoint, it's been borne out. I mean, like you said, those big deals did not work out, but also Kansas City just won the Super Bowl with the 7th-round rookie.
Yeah.
And the other team that they played in the Super Bowl, the NFC champion Philadelphia, got rid of their starting running back, brought in a new one. It's been a very fungible position. And I think what it does is, on the flip side of that, if you're Jonathan Taylor, you're sitting there, you've seen Quentin Nelson get paid, you've seen Shaq Leonard get paid, you've seen Braden Smith. Even Nyheim Hines got a little bit of a new deal. Wasn't anywhere near what they're talking here, but, he got a new deal before he was dealt to Buffalo. And you're thinking, what did they done that I didn't do? Well, they don't play running back. I mean, that's the end and really the end of the argument right now. And I think it's a really, really tough situation across the league. And I don't see it getting better anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, 100% agree. I think a lot of people make the comparison to, a Christian McCaffrey out there. And I've always said this, George, he's kind of on an island by himself, right? Like, because you take away his ability to run, let's just say he's no longer a running back, he's still catching 80, 100 passes, right? Like that's a much bigger deal than your typical, even a Derrick Henry. For all that he's done, for all that Jonathan Taylor, the Josh Jacobs, the Saquon Barkleys of the world, they don't have that element to their game, which really kind of changes the league, with this passing league that we're in. Just curious your thoughts, a tipping point for the Colts. Like at what point I expect him to get north of 10 million, but at what point, if Saquon's asking for 13, 14, at what point does Chris Ballard say, we're going to have to do something? And if so, do you consider getting something back for a Jonathan Taylor instead of just letting him walk?
I don't know that there's much of a market. That's part of the problem. Any team that you're going to deal him to is going to be in the same situation, trying to figure out how to make the economics work. And that's, again, why I feel like the running backs have so little room right now for leverage. I mean, they just – you're not seeing anybody get deals across the league. Dalvin Cook's still on the market, and I think he was asking for $10 million, I think is what I saw. He wants a $10 million deal. Now, some of that might be him just being smart and trying to get as late as possible, miss as much of training camp as he can, not put as much wear and tear on his body. But some of it's, I'm sure teams wondering how much they want to spend at that position. So I think that's the interesting thing right now. I don't know what offer's been made. I don't know if an official offer's been made. But definitely from the whispers and things I've heard, there have been talks between Taylor and the Colts. And so far, it doesn't sound like they're close. So that can change in a hurry. We've seen that, year after year after year, where a deal isn't close until it is, right? I mean, and all of a sudden, somebody comes up with the right offer, the right idea, and it all clicks into place. But I think it's a really tough environment to be making this deal in right now, just because if you're the Colts, you're sitting there saying, we don't have to go above our budget because nobody else is going to. You're not worried another team's going to swoop in and pay, $16 million or something because you're just not seeing that across the league. And if you're Jonathan Taylor, I think there's on his shoulders, there's a little bit of a burden to be the guy that breaks through this glass ceiling, be the guy that gets – that $13, $14 million deal, and then maybe open something up for some other running backs. I don't know how that stalemate ends. My guess right now is, if you're the Colts, you're thinking, well, play this year out, put him on the franchise tag next year and see how that saga plays out. Some of that will probably depend on how Barkley responds. Now, I saw where he kind of hinted maybe he'll hold out, but, I don't know how well that works as a strategy either for the running backs. They're really in a tough spot. Yeah. And I think the Colts, because of that, don't have to budge much here. So it'll be interesting to see how this ends.
Yeah, I mean, and it'd be curious, final thoughts on this, George, is just, do you let it just play out? Like, you don't know. You had this unique dynamic with a running quarterback. What's to say that situation's even going to work well for Jonathan Taylor? Like, wouldn't you want to maybe try before you buy in that, under those circumstances and just see what you got? I mean, you would think on paper it's going to be unbelievable, but you never know until you see how that looks on the field.
That's another really huge element of this that I don't think enough people are talking about. We really don't know exactly, what his role is in Shane Steichen's offense. And we can sit there and imagine what an Anthony Richardson, Jonathan Taylor led run game will look like. But like you said, you don't know until you're out there. I mean, last year we thought a Matt Ryan offense was going to be really good, really efficient. It was going to work well with the skill guys he had around him. And that couldn't have been further from the truth. So, yeah, I think there is some sentiment there of, and then throw in the ankle injury. It doesn't sound like it was severe, but obviously it was enough that he ended up having surgery after the season and enough that he wasn't able to go during the spring, which I don't put a lot on that because why are you going to put any wear and tear on a guy in the spring that you don't need to? But at the end of the day, you've seen it happen with Nelson. You've seen it happen with Leonard, a couple of the other guys who got the big deal, and then their injury history has come back and hurt them and hurt the team. So I think that's got to be an element in here too, where you want to see, is Jonathan Taylor going to be the 2021 version of himself again? And if he is, then how does that work in concert with what Shane Steichen wants to do on offense? I think there's a lot of reason to kind of let it play out, unless there's just a deal that both of them feel like is just too good to pass up on either side. But I think if that was the case, we would have already seen that happen.
Yeah, I mean, and this is kind of deal-making season for Chris Ballard, right? He's been notorious leading into training camp, getting things done kind of at the last second, sneaking one in on us, and just hit me in the middle of work where I have to have breaking news coming out. And lo and behold, Shaq Leonard, Braden Smith, you name it, Quentin Nelson. It'll be very, very interesting. Let's switch over to another position. Obviously, he's up for an extension, Michael Pittman Jr. Now, this is a little more unique, George, because this is a position that teams generally overpay for, right? Like they have to normally pay up to get this position. Is a Michael Pittman Jr. in your mind, is he a $20 million a year type of receiver, or is it a slippery slope when it comes to signing a guy like that who's just on the fringe, George, in my opinion, of being a number one. But at the same time, he's not really been a true blue, number one yet.
It's another really complicated situation for, like you said, completely different reasons. Obviously, that is a market that has been blowing up. You also wonder, though, how long that's going to happen, how long this boom lasts on the receiver side, because you've had so many good prospects coming out of college. This year wasn't as big a year at receiver, but the last 3 or 4 years have just been really deep, outstanding receiver classes. And you see, with these kids doing 7-on-7 from basically elementary school, they're getting better and better as they come into the league, and it seems like they're making an impact faster and faster. So I do wonder, on a completely separate, tangent there, how long the receiver boom will continue. But right now, you're looking at 20, 25 million. The Christian Kirk deal is the one that I keep kind of going to here, because I think where he was with the Cardinals is similar to where Pittman is right now. And I know ultimately Jacksonville decided it was worth it to do the deal they did because he was going to be a security blanket, a guy that Trevor Lawrence could turn to. And a lot of people didn't like that deal when it was signed. And I was among that number. But it really worked out for him last year, and they got what they wanted out of it. They got development from their quarterback. So I wonder, is the thought process going to be similar here in Indy? Are they going to think, you know what, Pittman, because I agree with you 100%, probably isn't right there at that elite level, but he's got some skills that tell you that maybe he could be. You like to see him stay healthy longer. You like to see a little more consistency. Do you go ahead and invest in that and say, okay, we're gonna give our quarterback somebody to grow with, or do you turn away? And honestly, the history that Chris Ballard has had, is not real positive at wide receiver. It's not a position he likes to spend a lot of money on, put a lot of assets into. So that's going to become another really, I think, complicated situation. One thing I think we know with Pitt for sure, he's not a guy who's going to take a discount. He's been around the NFL his whole career, his whole life. His dad played, obviously. He's been preparing for this, all along. So I don't think he's a guy who's going to panic and sign something early. I've seen a lot of people say, well, get it done now. I think he's a guy who'll be more than happy to bet on himself and see if he can get really big number, at the end of the year. And I don't know, will the Colts want to pay that? I think there's an element there of what we just talked about with Jonathan Taylor of what does this year look like? If he goes out and has a healthy season and looks like a number one guy in this offense, you probably go ahead and write that check and feel pretty good about it. If not, maybe you're looking at other avenues and other ways to fill that spot. I don't know. I think in a vacuum, both guys, the team wants back. If you're just talking about, do they like them both? Do they want them both to be here long term? Yeah, I think so. But I think for different reasons, there's really complicated elements in both these negotiations. And then at the end of the day, with both these guys, Taylor in particular, how does this play in the locker room? If the rest of the guys feel like you're not taking care of, two of the top skill guys on the team right now, that can have a trickle-down effect as well.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Quick shout-out to AO, Raven76, Colton, Bentley. So many people hopped on here. My co-host, Stephen Burton, even popped in a second. He's taking a little bit of family time. So just want to thank you guys real quick. Love your thoughts on, you guys commenting on JT and the MPG extension. Should be interesting. George, I just think that this might be a weird situation where it's a wait and see on both. I know that's murky and that's a little uncomfortable and it's also a little bit risky, right? But I think maybe new coach, new quarterback, lots of different, factors that factor into this. And it might just be a wait and see, man. I mean, it really will.
Absolutely. A new system. I think you do. You kind of wait and see how this year plays out. And then there is risk involved. There's no doubt. Both their numbers could go way up, But I think if you're Chris Ballard, that's a good problem to have at the end of the year. If
Sure.
if you take a wait and see with both of them and they both drive the market up, it's probably something you'd be pretty happy to deal with.
Yeah, man. I mean, if they go explode, it's a good problem to have, no doubt about it. Got a little bit of a soundbite, really not much for Colts to lean on with Shaq Leonard this whole offseason, not much talk. But we got a little clip. He's working out. At least it looks like he's trying to make this effort. Certain you've heard a little bit of the Jim Irsay comments on the McAfee show. Just your general thoughts. I doubt that you know anything because they are so tight-lipped, but just your general overall thoughts, how they've handled this. I know some have deemed this, Andrew Luck 2.0. I'm not there yet, not at all. But that being said, just your thoughts on Shaq Leonard potentially, getting back out there. What do you need to see from him?
Yeah, I mean, first he's just got to be on the field, right? I mean, I think that's the biggest thing because of the history, around here. And the Luck thing is so unique and such a once in a lifetime kind of a thing. There's no comparison. I'm 100% with you there. There's no comparison with Luck in anybody else in any other situation. But because of the way that we've seen just bad injury luck with this franchise forever, I think. I mean, it's going back as long as I can remember. There's going to be a lot of concern until you see him on the field. I think that's, if he would start the season on PUP, which right now, optimistically, it doesn't look like that's going to be the case. But if he would start training camp on PUP again, that would be a real red flag. I think you want to see him out there on Wednesday, even if he's limited. And then, the question after that becomes, can he be the guy he was his first 3 years in the league again? Can he be that maniac flying around, making plays all over the field? Because that's the most important question on defense. And I don't think anyone would question that. If he can come back, be that on and off field leader, changes everything about this defense. If you don't have him, then it's a really young group with a lot of question marks, So I think what you want to see with him is just out there from day one. And what he has said, a little bit that we talked to him before they broke spring workouts, he seems more optimistic than he was a year ago. So that's a positive side of things. He seems like he's got feeling in that leg. He's in a better spot mentally, physically than he was. But I don't think anyone's going to feel comfortable until, one, you see him on the field, and two, you start seeing him making plays again the way that you've seen Shaq Leonard make plays, for most of his career.
Yeah, I mean, because last year was really just a shell of himself. Even when he had the, a few spot starts out there, just wasn't that wasn't the maniac. That was definitely not that. As we're heading into training camp, George, Are there any position groups that you're looking for in particular, saying, man, I really want to give this group a little extra attention? Maybe the defensive back room, which is very young, or something like that. Any thoughts on a particular group?
The corners are right at the top of the list, I think, just because that was going to be a thin roster anyway. When you lose Stephon Gilmore and even Brandon Faison, I know he didn't have a great year, but he was one of the more experienced guys in that room. Now you've got, outside of Kenny Moore, I think there's like 5 starts on the roster behind him. 4 of those are Tony Brown. So it's really, really thin as far as on-field experience. But that it should make for a really interesting camp, because you've got guys with a real opportunity here to seize a role that probably earlier in their career than they expected. Juju Brent's right at the top of that list. I mean, we literally haven't seen him at all. He had the wrist surgery. We knew he wasn't going to do anything in the spring. He should be ready to go here in training camp. Everything on paper, he's a really good fit for this Gus Bradley defense. But he's also a rookie, and that's a position that's really hard to play right out of the gate.
Yeah.
So, and then you've got, Darius Rush, who's in the same boat. All kinds of talent, all kinds of, scheme fit. But again, rookie, got to go, right from day one. Dallas Flowers, essentially a rookie. I think he played 30 odd snaps, something like that on defense last year. It wasn't many. It was a little more than 30. He had 1 start. So, but I think it's 174. I think was the number I had earlier today. So again, essentially a rookie. And then Jalen Jones, who is another rookie. Darrell Baker, who had 3 appearances on special teams last year. I mean, it's guys you literally know nothing about as far as what they're going to do on the field. And that's obviously concerning, for the obvious reasons, but it's also, I think, from a training camp perspective, really intriguing, because these guys are going to be out there every day competing. You know how those one-on-one drills, you've been out there, you've watched that. The one-on-one drills with receivers, that's always one of the more competitive portions of training camp. This year, it should be through the roof. I mean, every corner on the roster has reason to believe if they have a good summer, they could start in September. And that to me is insane. Beyond that spot, I feel like almost linebacker might be the only spot on the roster unit where I don't think there's a competition for a starting role. I mean, if Shaq's healthy, that's set. And if he's not, you probably move EJ Speed into his role. And I would assume JoJo Doman takes over, where Speed would be on the strong side. So that's probably the only position group where it's pretty well spelled out. I think everybody else has at least one spot open. The 3 receiver spot, I think, is going to be really interesting to watch between Downs and McKenzie. Tight end is almost at the point where cornerback is, where almost every tight end on the roster probably has reason to believe they could get a pretty significant role if they come out and earn it. The offensive line, you get the right guard position that's still pretty open. Running back set, that's probably it. I mean, there is a lot of competition around. I think corners and tight ends and defensive end, I think those 3 are really the most intriguing to me, because you have multiple players there going for multiple roles.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's going to be a wide open camp. And then also you're going to have Shane Steichen in here. I guess, George, I'm curious to see what's it going to be like with him, under the helm. Is it going to be a little bit – I think I speak for most Colts fans that it's been a little bit too relaxed in the past. Now, I know last year they kind of tried to change a little bit of that. But that being said, still not good enough. Definitely not good enough. You think there's going to be a little more friction in this training camp than we've seen in the past under maybe a Frank Reich regime?
I think that's something that kind of naturally happens when a new coaching staff comes in, usually anyway, because guys know, that they haven't proven anything to this staff, especially on offense. Pretty much everybody on offense is starting from square one, because none of these position coaches, obviously the coordinator, obviously the head coach, they didn't bring these guys in, except for the rookies. They don't have anything invested in them, so I think that right away causes a little bit of, I don't want to say anxiousness, but it certainly puts a little bit more fire under you because you're going out to prove yourself and show this new coaching staff. And if you weren't a starter under the previous regime, you're definitely going out there now to say, they were wrong, prove them wrong, and put me in on the field. But I think what we've seen from Shane, and I hate to draw too many conclusions because we saw what 4 or 5 close practices. I mean, it's not like there's been a long track record here, but from what we saw, including rookie minicamp, he does seem to be a guy. I kind of compare it a little bit to the mentality that Pete Carroll's had out there in Seattle, just trying to get competition in there in every drill and every way they can. And I think that's one of the things I'm looking forward to training him to see is how that develops on a day-to-day basis, where you're trying to prepare for the season. I think it's something the fans would really respond to. I think some of the players would really respond to that sense of every drill, almost every exercise they did, there was some element there, like just something as small as bringing out pads, putting the trainers out there with pads during 7-on-7. So there's a defensive line that the quarterback's looking at. Something even as small as that, just these little things that you're trying to just add that little bit of push, friction, whatever word you want to use. We saw it during the spring a little bit. I think it'll be really fun to see how that develops over the summer.
No doubt about it. Hey, George, question for you. Are you a little bit curious on maybe, say, a right guard or a cornerback? We haven't went out and maybe dived in and signed a veteran, just to kind of little competition in there. And we are pretty young and thin in those positions. Are you a little bit surprised, or you think it's more of a let's wait and see, let's see what we got, then maybe we kind of rehash that as it gets a little bit closer to the actual season?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen Ballard a lot of times use that cut down day to bring in a more veteran presence, but I am surprised, especially on the offensive line. I mean, right guard, obviously, but even the tackle spot. I mean, in the spring, Blake Freeland was stepping in as a third tackle, and nothing against Blake Freeland. He's a good prospect. I think the Colts feel really good about getting him in the draft. But when a rookie's your third tackle and a second-year guy, who played about half a season is your starter left tackle, I'm surprised they didn't bring in somebody there like I keep using him as an example, but somebody like Rashad Berriman, who's coming into that receiver spot room, not necessarily to be a starter, but to push the guys and kind of show them how to practice at an NFL level, and whatever role he gets, he gets. I'm surprised it wasn't a tackle like that. I'm surprised it wasn't a guard like that. I'm surprised it hasn't been added in the cornerback spot. But what it tells me is they like the young talent that they have right now. They want to get them as many reps as they can in training camp in the preseason. And then I think you're right. As that goes on, as we get through a couple of preseason games and we see, what training camp looks like, then you might dip into that veteran market and see if you can pick somebody up to at least provide competition there. The offensive line part of it is baffling to me. And Ballard himself said at the combine that they wanted to add competition to the offensive line. And there are several rookies here, but there isn't really anybody they added from the outside who's a veteran presence in that group.
Yeah, I mean, it is a little bit head-scratching, George, because last year he had this approach where, he's obviously signed Matt Pryor. He had Danny Pentner, it's kind of penciled in to be that right guard. Seems a little bit the same this year. Now, maybe he's a little bit more confident in the guys who are going to be playing those positions. But that being said, doesn't it feel a little bit like the same? You're kind of giving those guys the job, so to speak, versus making them earn it, to be quite honest.
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. Definitely a left tackle. I mean, I don't know that there's anybody pushing Bernhard Raimann at all at this point. And I know they're high on him in the way he finished the year. That's not a knock on Raimann. It's more to your point that you did this last year and it backfired spectacularly. Right guard, I think there's a little bit of competition, but again, it's not. You didn't bring anybody. There wasn't a high draft pick. There wasn't a veteran free agent signing. It's Danny Penner on a bounce back year trying to push Will Fries. And then probably one of the more interesting guys in this camp is Emil Ekiyor.
Yeah.
Just because he's a local kid, over 40 starts at Alabama. There were some questions about his knee. But he definitely seems like a guy that could end up pushing Will Fries for that right guard spot. But again, we're not talking about, a $10 million signing. We're not talking about a second or third round pick. You're talking about an undrafted free agent. It feels a lot like last year. It really does. And I think it's so important that the offensive line bounce back. And as you said, maybe internally there's just a lot of faith in the guys that are there and they feel like they're going to come through. but they better, because I don't think anything's going to short circuit the development of Anthony Richardson or short circuit Shane Steichen's attempts to install this offense faster than a leaky offensive line.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean, with what we dealt with last year was just almost impossible to watch as we went down the stretch last year. And quite frankly, got Frank Reich fired from his job. I mean, just couldn't figure that out. Maybe they just have total faith in bringing in a new offensive line coach, new regime. Maybe it works out. Fingers crossed on that, but should be very, very interesting. I guess we'll switch to the quarterback position before we get off here. It'd be impossible, I guess, to talk about anything if you don't mention Anthony Richardson on a podcast nowadays. How much do you expect him to really push to be able to start week one? Or do you think Shane Steichen goes into this thing as an open book and says, I have no expectations. I just want to see what I see with my own eyes, and we're going to judge this thing day by day, play by play?
I think Steichen's definitely making it an open competition. Again, I think as a new head coach, it's one of the things that you want to do. He doesn't, again, have really a dog in the fight, but the organization's kind of tipped their hand. They want Anthony Richardson to win this job. They're not going to hand it to him. I don't think they're going to give it to him if he's not ready. But you can listen to the statements that Jim Irsay's made as recently as the Pat McAfee show. You can listen to what Ballard said during the offseason. You listen to Steichen every time we talk to him. They want Richardson out there soon. They want him out there sooner than later. And I think ideally they'd like him out there week one if he earns that role. The thing to me that really points the most in that direction is the other guys that you talk to, the other players who aren't involved in decision-making, but they talk a lot about Richardson as though he's the starting quarterback. And I think that just tells you how the locker room's feeling right now. That doesn't mean that Gardner Minshew can't step in, have a great summer, win the job. I think I look at it a little bit like boxing. You got to knock out the champ, right? Like, yeah. It's a fair competition. It's open. But if it goes to the judges, champion's probably keeping his belt most of the time, unless you have just absolutely dominated that fight. And I think Minshew's in that same boat. Yeah. I think if this goes to the scorecards, it's going to be Anthony Richardson. But if Minshew comes in there and knocks him out, that's the opportunity he has throughout this preseason.
Yeah, I think I guess I'm on this side. If you're going to be bad, you're probably not going to be a playoff football team. Just figure it out. Let the kid play. Let him, throw those interceptions. Let him go through those progressions that he needs to go through. And that's the only way he's going to learn. I mean, obviously, he's going to have this gift with his legs. He's probably going to make you're probably going to be writing a few articles about Anthony Richardson's legs this year, but then you're probably going to be writing a few articles about his indecisiveness and maybe some bad decision-making, late in the game or just throughout a game. But it'll be fun and fascinating to follow that story. Anything else before we hop off here that you think just, that you're excited about seeing? I know that we talked about a few position groups. Anything in general, just as you're heading here, because it's new for you too, right? New regime. It's new for you covering them as well.
Yeah, and I think that's the fun part when there's a coaching change. Everything about the coaching change sucks because people are losing their jobs. It's a really tense and uncomfortable environment most of the time until that new guy's hired. But then once the new crew comes in, it becomes a lot of fun, from our standpoint, because you're learning new personalities. You're learning the new way that Steichen's going to run practice, the new way that he's going to handle press conferences, all of that. We still don't have much of an idea about. Got a little teeny taste of it, but it's, we've barely seen like the first teaser trailer. We're nowhere near seeing the full film here. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Probably one of the things I'm looking forward to the most is watching, a full week of Shane Steichen practices and seeing kind of what culture he's trying to implement here. You don't get much of that 1 day a week. You just don't. You're in, you're out. A guy who looked good the day that we saw them might have been his best day of the week. A guy who was bad, it might have been his worst day of the week. You don't get that kind of consistent feel until you get to training camp. So that's going to be exciting. But I'm also really looking forward to how the fans react to all of this. I know that they've already sold out that first Saturday practice, so there's interest. There's going to be bodies out there. Will they get behind Jonathan Taylor? Will they support his quest here for a contract? Will they get behind Michael Pittman? Will they, support this young team, be optimistic and hopeful, or are they, I think there's reason for the fan base to be a little bit skeptical too. They feel like they've been patient now since 2014, waiting for that AFC South title. And do they want to see results, more quickly? This would be really interesting to me to watch how the fan base reacts. I think the last few years, you go to training camp, you got a veteran quarterback. It's a new guy, but you got a veteran quarterback. You have roles pretty well defined. It's a totally different feeling. This year, it just feels like everything's so open, and I'm really going to be interested to see how the fans respond to all of this.
Yeah, man, it should be so fun. It's a great time if anybody's not ever had a chance to go down to training camp. Tickets are free, like George just mentioned, sold out on that Saturday night. But it's definitely a good time for you and the family to get down there, and they've got plenty of things for the kids and all that good stuff. And just, it's exciting, man. Autographs. It's just an all around good time, as I absolutely loathe baseball, George, and I now get to be a little bit interested in the headlines with football coming right around the corner. But as always, George, thank you so much for hopping on, man. We love having you. We're going to have you more around, as the year goes on. And thanks, man.
No problem, man. Anytime.
Absolutely. Guys, thank you so much. If you haven't had a chance to join the No Horsing Around family, like, rate, review, share, and subscribe. We're just so thankful for each and every single one of your interactions, and we'll be covering this thing every day. Steve and I have made a commitment, 30 straight days, 30 straight podcasts as we lead into training camp, and we're going to have fun. So let's have fun with it and light us up in the comments. Thanks so much, and go Colts.